Hello. Some time ago, I saw a post on social media which really caught my attention. It was the story of an old lady being berated at a supermarket checkout for using a plastic bag. The young person doing the berating accused the old lady's generation of leaving young people with a devastated environment. She said that the younger generation was paying for the selfishness of the older generation because the older generation hadn't taken care of the natural world. I've left a link to this post in the description below, but I'm sure some of you have already seen it or something similar. Most of the post is the old lady's response about the enormous number of environmentally friendly things that people did in previous decades, myself included. Things that are rarely done today. Throughout her description of the clearly more environmentally friendly behaviour of the past generations, she frequently repeated the phrase, "But we didn't have the green thing back in our day." Here are some of the things she mentioned. Anyone who grew up in a country like Britain some decades ago will probably find them very familiar. We returned empty milk, pop and beer bottles to the shop and received the deposit we paid on them. The shop then sent them back to the plant so they could be washed, sterilised and reused again and again. We refilled pens when they ran out of ink instead of replacing the entire pen every time. We used stairs more because not all shopping areas had lifts and escalators. Lots of us walked and cycled to work or to school. Most of us dried our clothes outside when it wasn't raining and in front of fires or radiators when it was. We didn't use power-hungry tumble dryers, we used genuine wind and solar power. We mended things and didn't just replace them when they stopped working. Most of us could manage at least basic repairs with a needle and thread. In fact, we repaired clothes when they were torn or worn instead of replacing them, even when we were bored with them. Most of us could do basic repairs around the house, and so often avoided or put off replacing consumer goods. There were far fewer powered tools like food mixers, drills and lawnmowers, and many, many more. Nowadays, almost everything has a lithium battery in it. We didn't have green power, but we did have more human muscle power. We exercised just by living our lives. We didn't go to the gyms that needed heating in the winter and air condition in the summer. Most of us would have been astonished by the idea of walking on a power-hungry treadmill. We drank water from the tap and not from a plastic bottle shipped from who knows where. This is just a sample of all of the things that the lady mentioned. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that people behaved like this in the past because they cared about the environment. A lot of people couldn't even spell the word. As a very young man, I was one of the very small minority who did care. I even supported the British Ecology Party. The Ecology Party was the precursor of the Green Party. Oh, the naivety of youth. I really thought Green parties were about the environment. Most people behaved in a way that would be considered virtuous in environmental terms, not because they were environmentalists, but because they couldn't afford to do anything else. However, there was a dark cloud on the horizon. The throwaway society was gathering pace. In fact, the term throwaway society was first coined in 1955 in Life magazine when they published an article entitled Throwaway Living. It took time for this phenomenon to really catch on. It became cheaper and more efficient to produce goods that would be thrown away after each use. Indeed, goods designed to last a short time opened up all sorts of business opportunities. Very little attention was given to the long-term sustainability of all of this, and I would argue that almost no attention is given to the long-term sustainability of most human activities, even the so-called green ones, to this day. It doesn't take much observation to understand that a lot of so-called green measures that we're expected to participate in or that governments boast about are far less effective than what was happening all those years ago. For me, the difference today is that there is a great deal of hypocrisy and virtue signalling. We make a big fuss about recycling, but less about reusing, as was frequently done in the past. When we put waste plastic in separate bins, very few of us think about all the different varieties of plastic that have been put in the bins together and how much energy will be needed just to separate them and make any of them reusable. I'm obviously not saying all of this recycling is a waste of time, money and energy. I'm just saying that there are very often far better alternatives. It's also interesting that many of those who claim to be green often pick on some areas while ignoring others, which is incredibly environmentally damaging. Why is this? I suspect because some targets are easier to hate than others. It's easier to pick on cars than ships. They are more visible and don't bring us lots of cheap toys from countries like China. Don't get me onto batteries. One classic example is fast fashion. Many large clothing chains around the world sell clothes so cheap that people can afford to change them all the time. According to a number of estimates, the clothing industry is responsible for around 10% of the world's CO2 emissions. CO2 emissions being what is fashionable to obsess about at the moment. Whatever your views on that subject, I think it's clear that 10% of CO2 emissions for products that will probably be thrown away very quickly seems quite a lot. And that is before you start thinking about the amount of discarded clothes that end up in landfill, some of which have never been sold or worn. It's fashionable to blame the big corporations for this, but let's be honest, big companies don't force people to buy these products. A lot of people do buy and throw away these products would, I'm sure, be proud of the recycling of their domestic rubbish or something else equally green. Another example is the incentives that governments around the world use to encourage people to replace their cars with greener ones. As I'm not interested in cars, and I don't like driving or spending money on cars, I've always ignored these enticements. I generally buy new and run the car until it has become an old banger. Imagine my surprise when an automotive engineer who works in the environmental sector told me that not replacing and scrapping several cars over a period but keeping just one car is the most environmentally friendly form of car ownership. I was astonished. It wasn't my intention at all. Making new cars and disposing of the old ones consumes massive amounts of resources and energy. The same is true of most products. Maybe the moral is, if you really want to help the environment instead of just claiming to be green, you should be a cheapskate like me. Bye for now.